ELI 5. Why did Singapore separate from Malaysia? Singapore is an insanely wealthy nation per capita, with some of the cleanest air and water in the world. I can't help but wonder what things would be like had Malaysia held onto the land, and it makes me curious. Why did Malaysia let them leave? From what I remember, Singaporean leaders wanted to stay part of Malaysia. I am going to differ from all others' opinions. While the common narrative is that Singapore was kicked out against its will by Malaysia, Singapore has recently declassified a lot of sensitive documents of that period called the Albatross Files. The Albatross Files revealed that the leaders in the Singapore government had realized very early on that the integration of Singapore with Malaya, plus the Bornean states, was not working out well. After all, there were deep structural, political, and economic divides that simply could not be easily reconciled. Hence, as early as 1964, both sides started negotiations in secret. Both sides wanted to keep the separation secret until the very last moment because it would have certainly angered the British government and also the Bornean states. The Bornean states were incentivized to join to balance out the Chinese population. Separation at that time looked to be the best option, because you have two very ambitious and driven leaders who have contrasting vision for Malaysia. On hindsight, if the two of them have appeared at different times or belonged to two different generations, things would have been very different. But those were very tumultuous times. It was in the middle of Cold War, CCP was already in firm control of China, independence movements were everywhere, and a communist insurgency was ongoing in Malaya. As for the structural and political differences, Singapore is a majority ethnic Chinese state, while Malaya at that time was marginally majority ethnic Malay. The Malayan government had largely continued the British colonial legacy of divide and rule policy, because the people that got Malaya independent was essentially the same group of elites that the British colonial government trusted. After all, why risk uncertainty and a real threat of communist takeover when you already have this group of elites that know how to run a government? Asterisk divide and rule policy. During colonial times, the colonial government appointed different leaders to be in charge of the affairs of their respective communities. There was little official/formal mingling across communities. This was a colonial strategy to ensure the different communities were unable to form a united front against the colonial government, and was an effective means of controlling the colony. Hence, if an ethnic Chinese person has a problem, he goes to his ethnic Chinese community leader, Kapitan. If an ethnic Malay person has a problem, he goes to his community leader. There was little opportunity for different communities to mingle. Another fun fact from Malayan perspective, in the period between post-WW2 and independence, almost every ethnic community have different groups of people with different ideologies. From what I have read, the Malay community was dominated by three different ideological factions, which interestingly still has some traces today, and the Chinese community was also split between different ideologies. In the end, it was the pro-British, pro-establishment elite factions that prevailed, and they became the people in charge of the newly independent Malaya and later Malaysia. Edit, to add on, there were racial riots in Singapore during this period, and both KL and Singapore did not trust each other. In oversimplified, ELI 5 terms, the initial gentleman's agreement between the two leaders were that they would not interfere within each other's sphere of influence. However, the agreement was not honored. In 1963, one of the pro-KL parties formed an alliance with a few Singaporean local parties to contest against the Singapore Leaders Party in Singapore state elections, and was defeated. The next year, in a tit-for-tat move, the Singapore party sent candidates to contest federal elections in KL as a challenge to the KL parties. International media, especially Chinese media, likes to portray Singapore-Malaysia relations in a pretty bad light. But nah, we have love-hate relationship with one another. Both countries are culturally similar, share the same food culture and dictionary of profanities, etc. Edit 2 to add on more. A long-standing rumor of Singapore defense strategy is to amass enough forces to reach KL within 3 days. And interestingly, Malaysia does not seem to be bothered by this 3-day strategy and all the Chinooks, Apaches, F-15s, F-16s and Singapore's state-of-the-art naval assets lying just south of its border. They are also not bothered by Singapore having detachments of its army training jungle warfare in Brunei. What I see this is there is a possibility of a gentleman's agreement between the two militaries/governments with regards to what their militaries are doing. Both countries are also in a loose military alliance with UK, Australia, and New Zealand called FBDA.